Hi. So in this video, we're going to look at arrow functions and parameters in JavaScript. First though, let's take a step back and discuss function expressions. A function expression describes when a function is stored inside a variable. We can declare a named function expression where the function has a name, but usually a function expression does not have a name, so we refer to this as an anonymous function. Anonymous functions are especially useful when our main use for the function is to pass the function as an argument to another function. The reason behind why this is possible is because functions are objects in JavaScript. When you invoke or call a function expression, you use the variable name, not the function name. So when you use a function expression, the JavaScript interpreter will not do anything with the function until it gets to the line where the function is initialized. Let's look at an example of function expressions. So we're going to create a function which will take the name of a game as a string, and using a template literal, will print out the name of that game to the screen. Let's start by creating the variable to hold the function, which we'll call myFavoriteGame. Next, we'll use the equal sign and the function keyword, and we will set the parameter as game. Inside the function body, we want to return a template literal, which will just say my favorite game is, and then the game. We will then call the function and pass in the string Monopoly. Let's give this a go. When we run our function, we get our string printed to the screen with the game that we passed in. So where do arrow functions fit? Well, ES6 introduced the arrow function syntax, which meant we can omit the keyword function. Let's return to our code and update it by removing the function keyword. We'll run this function again, and we still get the same string returned. If we only need to return a value from the function, we can simplify this further and omit the curly braces and the keyword return. So now we are only using a single line statement. This is known as a single line arrow function. Let's return to our code and update this so it becomes a single line arrow function. Now let's move on to discussing arrow function parameters. So we're passing the string Monopoly as the argument to the function for the parameter game. The arrow function lets us simplify the function further if we are only using one parameter. If this is the case, we can omit the parentheses around the parameter. Note though that this is only possible when only one parameter is being used. If more than one parameters are being used, then parentheses must also be used. Let's return again to our example and we'll remove the parentheses. We'll run this code again, and we can see our return value remains the same. ES6 also introduced default parameters. Default parameters allow us to set a default value when we use a parameter, in case no argument is passed in. It means that when the function is invoked, we can guard against a parameter being undefined. It's a bit like a fallback option. So let's go back to our code and see what happens if we remove our string argument when we invoke our function. We'll run the code, and as you can see now we get undefined. This is because we did not use a default parameter, and there is now no value set for the game parameter. So next, let's look at the same example, but this time we will set a default parameter. Note that this requires us to use parentheses. If we do not do that, we'll get a syntax error. Lastly, let's look at the same example, but this time we'll also pass in an argument when the function is invoked. Because we did pass in an argument this time, our default parameter is not needed, and it's the argument we passed in that gets printed to the screen. Before we wrap up this video, let's briefly discuss the rest parameter. If we want to create a function that uses any number of arguments, then we can use the rest parameter. The rest parameter comprises of 3 dots. The arguments which are passed into the function get stored inside an array, and this array can be accessed from within the function's body. So let's add this to our function's parameter. And we'll also change the function call to accept two arguments, Monopoly and Chess. Let's also update our template literal to print out the length of the games passed in. Now we can run our code. We passed in two arguments when our function was called, so we get 2 printed out to our screen when the code is run. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for more content.